My sister falsely accused me of something unthinkable, and instead of believing me, my parents let them take me away without question. Years later, her shocking confession revealed the truth they refused to see back then, unraveling every lie that tore our family apart. I'm Eric, 33, a man whose life was utterly fractured by my sister, Anne, and her deceit. To truly grasp the aftermath, one must understand the tapestry of our lives beforehand. Growing up, Anne and I shared an extraordinary closeness, a bond perhaps stronger than most siblings, despite our 4-year age difference. We were, in essence, best friends. It feels odd to utter those words now, given all that transpired, but then it was simply our normal. Academically, I was no prodigy. Grades were a constant struggle, and I often just scraped by. Yet, I possessed an intense fascination with electronics. Not programming, but the intricate dance of dismantling and reassembling. My journey began with forgotten TV remotes and old radios from yard sales. By 16, my room housed a full-fledged workshop, soldering irons, multimeters, boxes overflowing with circuit boards and wires. My parents found it peculiar, especially my habit of spending hours in there with the door sealed, a detail that later became profoundly significant. But Anne, she understood. When I delved seriously into this world, she was 10, and she'd spend hours perched in my room observing my work. She'd bombard me with questions: what each component did, why specific wires connected. Sometimes she'd assist, organizing parts or holding items while I soldered. It was our special routine. Our parents, however, undeniably played favorites. Anne was the quintessential perfect child: straight A's, gymnastics team, student council, the complete package. Meanwhile, I was barely passing classes, dedicating my time either to my electronic sanctuary or the skate park. But Anne was my unwavering advocate. I recall one incident in my junior year when I was caught smoking behind the gym. Instead of allowing my suspension, Anne spun an elaborate tale, claiming I was merely holding the cigarette for someone who fled. She even performed a tearful plea to the principal, insisting I was on a path to reform and a suspension would shatter everything. The principal completely bought it. She also tutored me. Her explanations were far clearer than any teacher's. She'd dissect math problems in a way that finally clicked for me. Honestly, she's probably the sole reason I earned my high school diploma, and I, in turn, watched over her. As the elder brother, I was fiercely protective, perhaps overly so in hindsight. Any young man who expressed interest in her first had to contend with me. I wasn't aiming to be a menace. I simply wished to shield my little sister from casual disrespect. Even when I veered into trouble, staying out late, associating with questionable companions, Anne never judged. She'd shield me from our parents, fabricating excuses when I missed curfew. One time, I returned home at 3 in the morning to find her on the porch, waiting just to ensure my safe arrival. Looking back, perhaps our closeness was too intense. Perhaps that's precisely why it was so effortless for people to believe her later assertions. But then, it felt utterly normal. She was my sister, my closest confidant, the only person who truly grasped me. My parents attempted to steer me towards more conventional interests, signing me up for sports teams or after-school clubs, but I invariably gravitated back to my electronics. They perceived it as a waste of time, but Anne would champion my pursuits. He's skilled at it, she'd declare. Let him pursue his passion. That's the Anne I try to recall sometimes, the younger sister who believed in me when no one else did, who'd bring me snacks as I toiled on projects, who'd defend me, to our parents who trusted me enough to confide her troubles in me. This narrative is proving more difficult to recount than I imagined. When everything began to unravel, I was 18, fresh out of high school. Anne was 16 and starting to draw attention from boys at her school. As the overly protective elder brother, I reacted predictably. I scared them off. Not with violence, but by making it clear I was watching. There was one particularly persistent individual, Jake. A senior with a flashy car his parents bought him. Typical privileged kid. I caught him trying to entice Anne to skip class one day. Perhaps I shouldn't have shoved him against his car, but honestly, he was 18, attempting to sway my 16-year-old sister into truancy. What brother wouldn't be enraged? That's when the whispers began. Initially, it was just murmurs among students at Anne's school, remarks about my unusual protectiveness. Then it escalated. Someone started circulating the idea that the reason I didn't want other boys near Anne was because I desired her for myself. Sick, twisted notions like that. I distinctly recall the precise moment I realized something was profoundly amiss. It was a Tuesday after school. Typically, Anne would join me in my room to hang out while I worked on my projects, but this time, she went straight to her own room. When I knocked on her door to check on her, she told me to leave. I later found her crying in the kitchen that night. When I attempted to embrace her as I always did when she was upset, she recoiled. She actually flinched away from me. That had never, ever happened before. She mumbled something about being tired and retreated to her room. The ensuing days were strange. She stopped coming to my room, stopped speaking to me altogether. I, initially, assumed it was merely a fleeting teenage phase. I should have known better. Then, one morning, as I was repairing an old radio I'd acquired, I heard a knock on our front door. Not a casual knock, but that loud, official, unmistakable rap that instantly makes your stomach plummet. 2 police officers and a woman in a suit stood there. When my dad opened the door, they requested to speak with him privately first. I could hear their hushed conversation in the kitchen, but couldn't discern their words. Then my dad summoned me downstairs. The look on his face is etched into my memory, as if he were staring at a stranger. The woman in the suit introduced herself as being from Child Protective Services, CPS. She stated they needed to question me about my relationship with Anne. It turned out Anne had confided in her guidance counselor, alleging I had been, this is still difficult to articulate, touching her inappropriately. She claimed that was why I was always in my room with the door sealed, that I compelled her to enter, and yes, you can infer the rest. She asserted I had threatened to harm her if she ever spoke of it, stating that's why I was so aggressive, with boys who showed interest in her. She even claimed I used my electronic pursuits as a cover, that the wires and zip ties in my room were for other sinister purposes. My dad never questioned it, not once. He simply stood there, nodding as they spoke, as if suddenly everything made perfect sense to him. All those hours in my room, the sealed door, my protectiveness over Anne, in his mind, it all coalesced into something perverse. I attempted to explain, showing them my projects, the half-repaired radio on my desk, the boxes of circuit boards and old electronics. I tried to convey how Anne used to sit and observe me work, how she'd help me organize parts, but their minds were already made up. The CPS lady persisted with leading questions. Did you make Anne feel special by allowing her to assist you? Did you tell her she was different from other girls? Every word I uttered only seemed to incriminate me further. When they inquired about the incident where I pushed Jake, Anne had distorted that too. She claimed I was envious because she was developing feelings for other boys, that I couldn't bear her growing up and forming normal relationships because it meant losing control over her. The most unsettling part was her elaborate tale of my supposed increasing aggression recently, due to her pulling away, how I'd allegedly told her she was betraying me by speaking to other boys. None of it was true, yet the way she spun the narrative, even I almost believed it. And then I erupted, right there in front of everyone. Anne, what in God's name are you saying? My voice cracked, not from rage but from sheer incredulity. She wouldn't meet my gaze. Anne, look at me. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, arms wrapped around herself as if she were a fragile, vulnerable creature in need of protection. That small act only fueled my anger. You know this isn't true. You know it. I turned to our dad, desperate. Dad, come on, you know me. I would never... He cut me off. His voice was low, steady, but his expression... I'd never seen him look at me like that before. Not disappointed, not angry, just utterly resigned. You don't even want to hear me out. I took a step forward, but he raised his hand, as if I posed some kind of threat. Anne flinched. She flinched. That was it. That was the moment I knew. You can't seriously believe this? My voice dropped, all the fight abruptly drained from me. I looked at Anne again, truly looked at her. She still wouldn't meet my eyes. Why are you doing this? I whispered. She finally looked up. For a moment it seemed she might say something, perhaps even retract it all. But then she glanced at Dad, at the CPS lady, at the officer standing in our living room, and that's when she solidified her lie, her eyes filling with tears. She took a shaky breath and whispered, I'm sorry, Eric. And right then, I understood. She wasn't going to retract it because it was too late, because she was too deeply entangled, because she was terrified of the repercussions. I laughed. I actually laughed. Wow, I said. You're really doing this. You're actually doing this. Anne squeezed her arms tighter around herself. I just couldn't keep it in anymore. Dad clenched his jaw. Get your things. We're going to the station. And that was it. No trial, no evidence, no genuine questions. Just my dad driving me to the police station in silence, as if I were already guilty, as if I were a stranger, as if I were no longer his son. On the way to the police station, all I could contemplate was how effortlessly they made it all fit. The solitary elder brother who spent all his time alone in his room, the peculiar hobby with all the tools and wires, the aggressive protectiveness, the close relationship that abruptly soured. They perceived precisely what they wished to see. The interview room at the police station was exactly as depicted in films. They left me there for what felt like endless hours before 2 detectives entered. The male detective, Rivers, played the sympathetic interrogator, repeatedly saying things like, "We just want to comprehend what transpired, Eric. Assist us in assisting you." The female detective, whose name escapes me, merely sat there, scribbling notes and casting glances at me as if I were dirt. Rivers began to probe my electronics hobby. "Tell me about the things you construct," he said, attempting to sound genuinely interested. So I elucidated, fixing old radios, building simple circuits, basic stuff. "And Anne would help you with these projects?" "Yes, she'd organize parts, hold things while I soldered. She enjoyed learning about it." The female detective interjected, "So you'd have her alone in your room, door locked, handling your equipment?" That's when it registered. How they were twisting every detail. Every normal aspect suddenly sounded sinister. They persisted about the locked door. "I locked it because I had expensive tools," I tried to explain. "Dad would borrow stuff and not put it back." "Or," Rivers said, his voice hardening, "you locked it for other reasons." They possessed an entire dossier of evidence and statements alleging I had begun touching her when she was 12, precisely when she started taking an interest in my projects, how I used the electronics as a means to isolate her, made her feel special by imparting knowledge no one else possessed. "That's insane," I retorted. "She's my sister. I was teaching her because she was interested." The female detective leaned forward. Interested in electronics, or afraid of what would happen if she wasn't? Then they brought up the Jake incident, but in their rendition, I had attacked him, because he was taking Anne away from me. They had statements from other children at school regarding my possessiveness, how I had frightened away any boy who approached her. Rivers produced photographs of my room, taken that morning. They had manipulated it to appear like some kind of torture chamber. Close-ups of my tools, the wires, the zip ties I used for cable management. Even my project notes looked ominous in their photographs. "Your father says you'd spend hours alone with Anne in this room," Rivers said. "Care to tell us what truly occurred in there?" I lost control, began shouting about how they were distorting normal brother-sister interactions into something perverted. A grave error. Rivers simply nodded as if I'd confirmed something. "Classic defensive reaction," he remarked to his partner. Then they brought up my academic record, my lack of friends, the hours spent alone in my room. They constructed an entire profile of an isolated, unstable individual obsessed with his sister. They weren't merely investigating. They were building a case. And the more I denied it, the more culpable I appeared. My lawyer, if she could even be called that, barely offered a defense. "We need to consider a plea deal," she informed me, as if it were my sole recourse. "If this proceeds to trial, you could be facing 20 years in prison." After hours of this relentless interrogation, Rivers finally stated, "Look, Eric, here's the arrangement. We possess sufficient grounds for charges, serious charges. But if you cooperate with us, admit what transpired, and demonstrate remorse, we can assist you." "I didn't do anything wrong," I declared for perhaps the 100th time. "Then explain why Anne would fabricate this." I couldn't, because it defied logic. My sister, whom I had protected and cared for, who used to wait up to ensure my safe return home, why would she do this? The subsequent period is something of a blur. There were meetings with lawyers. My parents had retained one for Anne, but informed me I had to secure my own. The public defender assigned to me was fresh out of law school and already convinced of my guilt. She outlined my options. I could fight it, but she made it unequivocally clear that victory was improbable. "Juries believe victims," she stated flatly. "And Anne is young, emotional, and persuasive." She presented the stark reality. If I proceeded to trial, I faced a potential 20 years in prison. The plea deal was mercy. 5 years probation, lifelong registration, but no incarceration. "If you take this to trial and lose," she warned, "you won't get another opportunity." My own parents weren't even on my side. Dad simply shook his head. "Don't put your sister through a trial," he urged. "Just accept the deal." "But I'm innocent," I pleaded. "They all claim that," she replied without glancing up from her papers. "They have your sister's testimony, documentation of behavioral changes, witness statements about your possessive behavior. No jury will believe you over a traumatized 16-year-old girl. My dad came to see me once before I accepted the deal. I hadn't seen him since he dropped me at the station. I harbored a faint hope he might finally grasp the truth. Instead, he said, "Just admit what you did, Eric. Don't make your sister go through a trial." "Dad, please," I begged. "You know me. You know I'd never." He cut me off. "I thought I knew you. Guess I didn't." That was the last genuine conversation I had with my father. 2 days later, I accepted the deal, pleading no contest to sexual assault of a minor. I received 5 years probation and a lifetime on the registry. Some might question why I would plead guilty if I was innocent. The truth is, they break you. They seize every normal aspect of your existence and twist it until you can no longer even trust your own recollections. And when everyone, your family, the police, even your own legal counsel believes you're culpable, you begin to think perhaps fighting is futile. Being on the registry obliterates your life in unforeseen ways. Everyone discusses the major restrictions, inability to reside near schools, exclusion from certain professions, and so forth. But it's the subtle aspects that truly chip away at you. The first place I attempted to rent after everything, the landlady was poised to let me sign the lease. Then she performed the background check. I can still visualize her expression when she saw what appeared. She actually recoiled from me, as if I might assault her right there in her office. "I'm sorry," she said. "I have grandchildren who visit. I'm sure you understand." That became my reality. People expressing regret, while treating me like some kind of monster. Finding employment was a nightmare. Most establishments wouldn't even consider my application once they observed I had to check that box. The few interviews I managed to secure typically ended the same way. "We'll call you." They never did. Finally, I located a man named Mike, who operated a small manufacturing shop. He employed individuals others wouldn't. Ex-convicts, addicts striving for sobriety, people like me. The compensation was abysmal, and the work was arduous, but at least it was something. "Look, Eric," Mike informed me on my first day, "I don't care what you did. Just show up on time and fulfill your duties." I worked there for nearly 2 years. Then, someone discovered my past and began instigating problems, telling other workers they shouldn't have to collaborate with someone like me, that I was dangerous. Mike tried to defend me, but eventually, he had no choice but to let me go. "Can't risk losing my entire workforce," he stated. At least he provided a decent severance package. I lost my apartment shortly thereafter, ended up residing in my car for a while. A Planet Fitness membership became my greatest ally, $10 a month for a place to shower and use the bathroom. I'd park in 24-hour Walmart lots to sleep. Security generally left you undisturbed if you didn't cause trouble. The most agonizing part, however, wasn't even the practical difficulties. It was witnessing life proceed without me through. Mutual friends on Facebook before they banned my account. I saw Anne graduating high school with honors, attending college on a full scholarship, meeting this wealthy man, Billy, at some campus event. Meanwhile, I was consuming cold ravioli from a can in my car, attempting to determine where I could park for the night without being harassed by law enforcement. I made the error of attempting to date once. I met a woman named Sarah at one of my jobs. She was kind, didn't probe too deeply into my past. We went out a few times. Things seemed promising. Then she inquired why I always had to verify the address of wherever we were going. I chose to be candid. I informed her about the registration requirement, how I had to be cautious about my whereabouts. I tried to explain that I was innocent, that it was a false accusation. She stated she needed time to think. The next day, her brother and 2 of his friends appeared at my work. I had to resign from that job as well. I began frequenting a small library branch after that. The librarian there, she somewhat understood my predicament but never vocalized it. She'd simply leave books she thought I'd appreciate on the returns cart. Many technical manuals, electronics books. I suppose she'd noticed my usual reading material. One day, she observed me browse online courses, sat down, and assisted me in finding free ones I could enroll in. "Education is everyone's right," she declared. She was the sole person who treated me like a human being in years. I began to delve into cryptocurrency through those courses. I reasoned it was something I could pursue without anyone scrutinizing my background. I made a modest income here and there trading. But, what truly devastated me? Seeing comments on Anne's social media, all these individuals extolling her bravery, marveling at how she had overcome her trauma to achieve such success. She even authored an article for her college paper about being a survivor. People were hailing her as an inspiration. Meanwhile, I was barely surviving. Ironic, isn't it? I used to contemplate trying to clear my name, but who would believe me? Anne was this perfect, successful college student. I was merely some pariah living in his car. The system doesn't care about people like me. That's how I spent most of my 20s, moving from one job to another, one place to another, never remaining anywhere long enough for people to discover my past, never forming friendships, because what's the point when they'll simply abandon you once they know? Some nights I'd lie in my car, gazing at old family photographs on my phone, images of Anne and me as children, attempting to decipher where it all went wrong, what I could have done differently. That's the true cost of being on the registry. It doesn't merely strip away your freedom, it seizes your past, your future, your entire identity. You cease to be a person and become a label. But then everything abruptly changed. It was a perfectly ordinary Tuesday. I was at work, having found another factory job, better than the last one, when I received an email from a private investigator. I almost deleted it, thinking it was spam, but something compelled me to read it. The PI stated he had been hired by Anne's husband, Billy, to investigate her past. Apparently, she had been behaving strangely lately, and Billy had begun to dig. The PI had unearthed inconsistencies in her narrative about me and wished to speak. I initially ignored it. I'd had enough people disrupt my life already. But then he sent another email with proof he was legitimate. Court documents, case files, material I'd never seen before. We met at a diner just outside town. The PI, I'll call him Frank, possessed a massive folder of documents. "Your sister's story is unraveling," he stated, spreading papers across the table. "Been doing this job 30 years, never witnessed someone botch their own lie this badly." It turned out Anne had been careless, remarkably so. The timeline she provided for when events supposedly transpired didn't align with school records. The witness statements from her friends, they shifted every time she recounted the story. But what completely blindsided me was this. Remember Jake, the senior who kept pursuing her? It turned out Anne had been secretly dating him. And not just that, she was caught in his car engaging in activities she was unequivocally not supposed to be doing. She was convinced I was going to inform our parents about it. Perhaps because she knew I had always been protective, or perhaps simply out of pure panic. Either way, she required a diversion, something sufficiently significant and shocking to ensure no one even considered Jake. So she fabricated the accusations, aware that once those words were uttered, nothing else would matter. Frank possessed texts between Anne and her friends from back then, screenshots she believed were deleted. In them, she literally planned the entire scheme, discussing her need for a nuclear option to silence me. "She didn't expect it to go as far as it did," Frank said. "Reading these messages, it seems she thought they'd just send you away to live with relatives or something. When your dad went full scorched earth, she was too scared to retract it." I simply sat there, reading through everything, seeing proof of what I had instinctively known all along. Frank continued speaking. "Billy hired me because she's been acting erratically lately, drinking too much, growing paranoid. He found her crying over old family photos one night. When he inquired about me, she completely shut down. That's when he contacted me. Then Frank produced one final document, a signed confession from Anne. Billy had confronted her with all the evidence, and she broke down and confessed everything. "I need you to grasp something," Frank stated. "This isn't going to magically mend everything. The legal system dislikes admitting its errors, but it's a beginning." He left me with copies of everything. I spent that entire night poring over it all. The text where she meticulously planned it, the confession where she finally admitted the truth. I even unearthed some posts she made on an online forum, inquiring how to make abuse allegations more believable. The next day, I contacted a lawyer, a true legal professional this time, not some overworked public defender who had already deemed me guilty. We filed for post-conviction relief based on new evidence. My lawyer asserted that Anne's confession, combined with the discrepancies Frank had uncovered, was sufficiently strong to vacate my conviction and remove me from the registry. It took months of hearings, but eventually a judge ruled in my favor. My record was wiped clean. I should have felt relief. I should have felt something, but all I could contemplate was how long it had taken, how much I had irrevocably lost in the process. A week later, an envelope landed in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew its sender before I even opened it. My parents. The first contact in 10 years. My hands trembled as I tore it open, not from excitement but from sheer disbelief. Inside was a letter, penned in my dad's stiff, impersonal handwriting. They wished to meet, stating Anne had finally come clean. Well, partially. She spun some diluted version of the truth, portraying herself as a frightened little girl who made a terrible error. No mention of the calculated falsehoods, the years of suffering she inflicted upon me. But apparently, it was enough for them to finally believe I was innocent. Tucked inside the envelope was a check for $50,000, a sum that likely felt generous to them, as if it could somehow obliterate a decade of being treated like a monster, as if it could repurchase my stolen years, my dignity, my very life. I held it up to the light for a second, then laughed. Nothing had changed. They still believed problems could be solved with a price tag. Money was not what I sought. I needed the truth to be known, and I needed to hear it from someone else's mouth. So I retrieved the number from Frank and called him. My hands were shaking when I finally dialed. He answered after a few rings, his voice wary. "Hello?" "Billy, this is Eric." There was a long pause, then, cautiously, "Eric who?" I allowed that sting for a second before replying. "Anne's brother." Silence, then a low, humorless chuckle. "That's amusing, because Anne never mentioned having a brother. Never mentioned any family, actually." I swallowed down the immediate surge of anger. "Yeah, that tracks. Can't have the skeletons in her closet running their mouths, right?" Billy exhaled sharply. Jesus, I knew she was concealing things, but I've been married to this woman for years, had a kid with her, and I didn't even know she had a brother. Not one she didn't completely destroy first, I stated, flatly. There was another pause before he muttered, "Unbelievable." His voice held that tight edge of someone realizing just how profoundly they'd been manipulated. Then he sighed, and when he spoke again, his voice was firm, resolute. "I'm filing for divorce." I didn't say anything at first, just aloud, the weight of his words to settle between us. Then, finally, I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "Good," I said. "You deserve better." I ended the call after that. No point in prolonging it, but as I set my phone down, a strange sense of relief washed over me. Then I found the social media posts. Anne had deactivated all her accounts, but not before posting this lengthy apology about how she'd remembered things wrong as a teenager. She made herself sound like the victim somehow, a poor, confused girl who made a mistake, now bravely stepping forward with the truth. Her perfect life began to crumble after that. Billy filed for divorce. The school where she worked, yes, she became a teacher, imagine that, requested her resignation. It turns out they don't favor teachers who've admitted to fabricating false abuse allegations. I later discovered that Billy gained full custody of their child. He used Anne's confession to prove she was unstable. She attempted to contest it, but Frank's investigation had unearthed other lies too, many of them. The genuine truth, she had been lying about everything for years, not just about me. She concocted stories about other people too, exhibiting a consistent pattern of accusing individuals when things didn't go her way. Some wondered why she finally confessed. According to Frank, my parents had started noticing things. Anne had been acting erratically for months, disappearing for hours without explanation, having sudden outbursts over nothing, drinking excessively at family gatherings. But the final breaking point came when she made a slip during a heated argument with my mom. She blurted out something about how I wouldn't have suffered if Dad hadn't overreacted. My mom froze, pressed her for details. Anne attempted to backtrack, but it was too late. The seed of doubt had already been planted. My dad, ever the controlling figure, began to investigate. He reached out to people from Anne's past, even telephoned her old high school friends. And just like that, the fissures in her story started to emerge. By the time Billy hired Frank, Anne was already spiraling, attempting to piece together a lie that was rapidly disintegrating. So, when Billy confronted her with the evidence, the texts, the inconsistencies, the proof she believed was long buried, she broke, and that's when my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was shaky as if she had been weeping for hours. "Eric, please, we need to talk." I almost hung up right then, but something in her tone kept me on the line. She began rambling about Anne, about how she had finally told them her side of things, how she admitted she had made some mistakes, but that she had been young, scared, confused. "She's not the same person anymore," my mother insisted. "She's broken, Eric. She cries every day. She knows she ruined your life, and she can barely live with herself." Then they actually asked, "Can't you just forgive her?" That infuriated me. Forgive? As if she had borrowed my car and crashed it. As if she had stolen some money from me. As if she hadn't stripped away my entire existence, left me in ruins while she was allowed to move on and play the victim for years. "You don't understand," my mom continued. "She's suffering now, too." That was the moment I decided to meet them. Not for closure. Not to reconstruct some shattered family bond. I wanted them to comprehend precisely what they had done to me. "Fine," I said. "Let's meet." But I already knew how it would conclude. We met at a restaurant halfway between our cities. Mom began crying as soon as she saw me. Dad simply sat there, looking old and defeated. I suppose having your golden child turn out to be a liar does that to you. Mom tried to embrace me. I stepped back. "Let's just sit down," I said. They had prepared an entire speech about how sorry they were, how they should have believed me, how they wished to rebuild our family. Dad even produced his checkbook again, as if throwing money at it would resolve everything. "Put that away," I told him. "I didn't come here for your money." Mom kept repeating phrases like, "We were just trying to protect your sister," and "We did what we believed was right at the time," making excuses as always. I allowed them to exhaust their rhetoric. Then I retrieved the folder Frank had given me and began reading Anne's texts aloud, the ones where she meticulously orchestrated the entire scheme. I observed their faces as they realized just how thoroughly their cherished daughter had manipulated them. She was scared, Mom attempted to defend her. She was just a child. I was barely an adult, I countered. Where was my protection? Where was my benefit of the doubt? Dad tried next. "We know we messed up. We want to make it right." "Make it right?" I laughed. "You want to make it right? Can you restore my 20s? Can you undo the registry, the jobs I lost, the people who treated me like garbage?" They simply sat there, finally devoid of excuses. I recounted everything then, about living in my car, showering at Planet Fitness, eating cold food because I couldn't afford a place with a kitchen. I showed them the scars on my wrists from my lowest point. Mom vomited in the restaurant bathroom. For the first time in years, my parents were finally compelled to sit with the truth, the undeniable proof that they had cast aside their own son without hesitation, that their golden child was anything but golden. I watched them sit there in stunned silence, their entire world crumbling in real time. "You did this," I said, my voice steady. "You let it happen." My father looked as if he wished to argue, as if he desired to defend himself. But for once, he didn't. He just stared at the table, jaw clenched. Mom, however, still tried. "Eric, we were just trying to protect her. We thought we were doing the right thing." I leaned back, exhaling slowly. "You know what the worst part is? I comprehend that. I do. If I genuinely was some kind of monster, you would have been acting as any decent parent should. But you never even afforded me a chance. Not once. You decided I was guilty because it was simpler than questioning Anne, and you allowed me to rot for it." Tears streamed down her face. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We were so wrong." I let that settle. For a moment, because yes, they were wrong. They were more than wrong. But nothing they said could ever undo what I had lost. The 10 years of my life where I wasn't a person, just a label. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling. "Please, Eric, we can't alter the past, but we're still your parents. Can we at least try to fix this?" I pulled my hand back before she could touch me. "Fix it?" I scoffed. "Tell me, Mom, how exactly do you fix 10 years? She opened her mouth, but no words emerged. Dad finally spoke. "You have every right to despise us." His voice was hoarse with age. "But we're still your family." I shook my head. "No, you ceased to be my family the moment you decided I wasn't worth fighting for." A heavy silence settled between us. They had anticipated anger, perhaps even screaming, but I was beyond all that. I didn't need to yell. They were drowning in their own guilt without me uttering another word. Then Mom played her final card. "Anne is suffering too, Eric." I stared at her. Of course she would say that. "She lost everything." She continued. "Her marriage, her career, her friends." "She deserved to," I cut in, my voice cold. Mom recoiled as if I had struck her. "She made a choice," I stated, leveling my gaze at them both. "She lied, and I paid the price. But you—" I looked directly at my father, who flinched under my stare. "You made a choice too. You believed her without a second thought. You let them take me without hesitation." Dad shut his eyes for a moment, as if he could block out the truth. Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "She's not the same person anymore." I let out a dry chuckle. "Neither am I." And that was the true tragedy, wasn't it? The person they had known, the boy who spent hours in his room repairing radios, who would have done anything for his little sister. He was gone. They had buried him a decade ago when they allowed the police to take me away. I grabbed the check my father had placed on the table earlier, $50,000, a sum they had probably conjured from thin air, thinking money could erase what they had done. I stared at it for a second, then tore it in half. "I don't need your money," I said. "I don't need anything from you." Mom started sobbing. Dad said nothing. He just sat there like a man finally realizing he had lost something he could never reclaim. I stood up. "You made your choice," I said quietly. "Now, you get to live with it." I walked out without looking back. I felt nothing when I left that restaurant. No surge of victory, no weight lifted from my shoulders, just nothing. And perhaps that was the true closure. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but I knew its origin before I even opened it. It was from Anne. I stared at the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. The letter inside was brief. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." That was it. No excuses, no explanation, just that. I held it for a moment, then set it down, and I never wrote back. And yes, life didn't miraculously become perfect after that. The damage had been done, and I would always bear the scars of those 10 years. But I was finally free. Truly free. With my record expunged, I could finally live without the weight of my past clinging to me. I moved to a new city, started fresh, built up my electronics repair business from the ground up, and I never looked back. My parents and Anne, they became phantoms of a life I had left behind. Perhaps one day I'd think about them and feel something. But for now, I was finally living my life on my own terms.